Hi, everyone. It's great to be with you all tonight. I want to start actually by turning things around, and I want to ask all of you to take a moment. I want you to think back to the first time in your life that you stepped up on an issue or cause or on behalf of someone you cared about. Think back as far back as you can. And then I'd like you to take a minute and tell that story to the person sitting next to you. Thank you. Let's come back together, please. Could I get 2 volunteers to share your story with the group? Great. If you could stand up and just introduce yourself and share your story quickly with the group, that'd be great. I got a mic there.
Hello, everybody. My name is Denise, and I have an autistic son, so just trying to get the word out and helping people, especially minorities, who are struggling through the process.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Denise. And do I have one other person? Some right here.
Let me get a mic to you.
Oh, great, we got a mic right here.
Hi, my name's Stacy. And when I was 7, my mom had me going door to door campaigning for Jimmy Carter.
That's great. So I like to start with that question because I like to ground everyone in our leadership journeys. When I talk about everyone leads, it doesn't mean everyone should be in charge at the same time. What it does mean is that leadership's a muscle. And like every other muscle, it gets stronger only with exercise and practice. And that first time we step up, whether it's our mom dragging us out to go campaign for somebody, or it's because we're concerned about our child and want to help others who have similar situations, whatever it is, that's when we start really building that muscle, and everybody has it. And so today I'm going to talk through a number of stories primarily about how this idea of everyone leads really plays out and when we think about how do we solve problems in communities and what's our role. So I want to start by sharing two stories. The first is Biz and Nesh Talbot Scott. Biz was an 18-year-old young woman who was in community college in Milwaukee. She had a 3-year-old son, and she knew she was smart, but she had no idea of her potential. And Biz entered our program and began working at an after-school program. And she began realizing that she wanted to go to college. And she went. And from there, she went to University of Michigan Law School and made law review, clerked for a federal judge, began a prestigious career in Washington, and most recently was one of the directors of presidential personnel at the White House. Most people don't look at a single mom in community college on public assistance and think there's a White House lawyer. Peter Hoffel was 27 years old. He had a philosophy degree, which meant he was working at a deli. And it meant mainly he had really cool sandwich names at the What's Fresh Deli. And one day a young woman from Public Eyes asked if we could hang a poster in the deli. And Peter struck up a conversation with her. And he claims at that time of his life he was someone who'd stay up late at night talking politics and social issues with his friends, but he never thought of himself as someone who could do anything about all that. He ended up working at a legal action organization, started working with people with disabilities, found he had a passion for that. Today, he is the CEO of the National Alliance for Mental Illness in Milwaukee, and one of our state's top disability rights advocates. Again, most people don't look at the person making sandwiches in the deli and think there's a leader. And that's what we've been doing at Public Eyes for the last 20 years with over 5,000 people, is we've tried to find leaders where others don't look. And we found that there's incredible talent throughout our communities, incredible talent. And that in a lot of cases, a lot of our young people don't even think that they can be part of the solution, but they have everything they need. And we just have to create more room for them to lead. The reason why I'm so passionate about it is that was me. I was someone who in my teens struggled with depression and addiction. I was institutionalized, and I was a product of a bunch of social services. I was homeless when I was 18 when that picture was taken. And I was someone who really didn't have a clue what I wanted to do. I was, as I said, I was a product of social services and mentors and support groups, and somehow some of it started to stick, and as my life came together, I think it made sense that I wanted to help others because so many people had helped me. But I had no idea what to do with that. And then I, by chance, I was an older student at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and I got a chance to attend a conference, and I sat down next to this woman, and she told me she was starting this new organization called Public Allies to help young people who wanted to make a difference and didn't know how. And that was me. And so with all the experience I had as a telemarketer at an insurance agency, a gardener, and a former drug dealer, I thought I could start a nonprofit organization. Thought I had all the skills I need, and I could have certainly benefited from something like the Clinton School of Public Service, but I went to the School of Hard Knocks in that regard. But I could have never imagined on that journey that 20 years later I'd be an advisor to the President of the United States, that I would have met another and worked with another President of the United States, that I'd lead this network of over 5,000 young leaders across the country. And there's been a lot of ups and downs on that journey. But it's that journey that makes me feel so optimistic about what young people can achieve. And it's because, and if I said I did it all alone, I'd be lying to you. It's been the product of the leadership of many people who've worked with me to make this thing happen. The definition of Public Allies that helps us drive this is, first, we look at leadership as an action everyone can do, not a position few people can hold. And we believe when you shift the notion from the noun to the verb, you really open up the possibility of who can participate in leadership. The second part is a core work of leadership. What do leaders do? Leaders take responsibility. Leaders step up and say, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get this done. I'm willing to learn what I have to learn, work with whoever I have to work with, learn, that leaders own the result. They say, I'm going to make this happen. That's the core work of leadership. And because we're working with others, we have to get others to believe and share and work with us toward that. And the third part, I would argue, is the secret sauce, which is the values. What are the values of leadership that are necessary for us to be credible and effective in bringing people together to work on common goals? And so I'm going to spend most of my time today talking about that. But I want to take this first idea of leadership as an action, not a position, and the notion that change always takes lots of leadership. And I want to tell a story we all know, but tell it in a different kind of way. I had the great privilege this morning that I'm sure many of you have had. I went to Little Rock Central High School, and I think I watched every little video, and learning about the Little Rock Nine and Daisy Bates and the NAACP and the leaders and the work that happened was really inspiring to me. And I find a lot of great lessons out of the civil rights movement. I write a lot about it because I find a lot of people take the wrong lessons, that it's about one leader, about iconic leadership, but it's always a messier story. So let's take the story of Rosa Parks and the Montgomery bus boycott, and I want to tell it in a different kind of way. And I want to start with Rosa Parks. Rosa was a lifelong activist. Even as a child, she stood up against segregation. She got married to Raymond Parks. Partly, she fell in love with him because of his work on the Scottsboro 9 case, which was a case that was defended by the Communist Party in the early 1930s of men falsely accused of rape in Alabama. And it was his activism that she fell in love with. She got involved with the local NAACP in the early 1940s, and she and Edie Nixon ran to be president and secretary. Edie Nixon was the first unlearned man to lead an NAACP chapter, and she was as well. And they were president and secretary, positions they held for over a decade in leading the local NAACP chapter. Through that, she went to trainings in Tennessee and Florida by the great organizer Ella Baker, who saw a lot of potential in her, and they corresponded and kept in touch. And Ella encouraged her to create a youth council of the NAACP in Alabama, which she did, which met at her church. While working as a seamstress, she also got to know Clifford and Virginia Dewar, who were the town's leading liberals. And one day, while she was talking to Virginia Dewar about her NAACP work, Virginia Dewar suggested that she go to the Highlander Academy and go to their nonviolent civil disobedience trainings. And Virginia Dewar raised money to send Rosa to a 2-week training at the Highlander School in Tennessee, an interracial group learning about nonviolent civil disobedience, where she was trained by the great Septima Clark and Miles Horton, who also saw great potential and continued corresponding with her after she left. And Rosa Parks got to know a young lawyer in town, Fred Gray, who was the youngest black lawyer in town, 24 years old. And every week she had lunch with him, and she got him engaged in the civil rights struggle in Montgomery. Then in February of 1955, Claudette Colvin, at age 15, refused to move to the back of the bus and was arrested. And the local NAACP leaders started arguing about whether to use her case to strike at the Jim Crow laws there. But the male leaders didn't feel she was a sympathetic enough character. She was a kid. There were rumors she was pregnant. There was, that she had allegedly resisted arrest, and they thought she wouldn't be a good spokesperson or symbol for the movement. She was a member of Rosa Parks' youth council. Rosa Parks fought vigorously for them to use her case to challenge segregation. A few months later, Rosa Parks refuses to move to the back of the bus. Now, even in her New York Times obituary, they called her an inadvertent activist. Does she sound like she was an accidental activist? No. She said, "I wasn't a tired seamstress, I was tired of racism." She gets arrested. Clifford and Virginia Dewar and Edie Nixon go to get her out of jail. They go back to her home and they start arguing about whether to use her case to strike at segregation. She finally agrees with Raymond that she's willing to be the case they use. Edie Nixon calls Joanna Robinson, head of the Women's Political Council, which was an association of black women in Montgomery, who'd been arguing for 2 years to do a bus boycott. And Joanna Robinson gets the call from Edie Nixon saying, "Go." Well, where she goes is to Alabama State College, the historically black college, which is a state university, and on state equipment stays up all night printing 15,000 flyers. Now imagine doing 15,000 flyers on 2014 technology, and imagine 1955 technology, and imagine it was a state-owned institution, and she's making flyers to strike at segregation. The next morning, Edie Nixon calls Ralph Abernathy at the First Baptist Church and says, "We should organize a meeting of preachers so that they can get the word out on Sunday that we're going to do a bus boycott on Monday." And Ralph Abernathy says, "You know, there's this new preacher in town. He's only been here a few months. He's 26 years old. And if he gets chased out of town, no one will notice. Let's do it at his church." And that's how Martin Luther King and Dexter Avenue Baptist Church hosted the first meeting. Only one white pastor, who happened to be Rosa Parks' pastor, Robert Grates, attended the meeting. And his home was bombed in retaliation for his participation. Rufus Lewis was a character. He owned bars on the outside of town. And he was Edie Nixon's rival to lead the local NAACP. And he couldn't stand Nixon. He also couldn't stand that, as he said, an unlearned man was leading the local NAACP. And for 12 years, he ran against him and lost every time. But he wasn't going to let this happen with the Montgomery Improvement Association, which was the new organization they created. So he had an idea. I'm going to have this young guy be the candidate, and then I can be his puppet master. And so he nominates this young new kid, Martin Luther King, to be head of the Montgomery Improvement Association, and he beats E.D. Nixon to be head of the MIA. And the first thing Dr. King does is he calls a pastor in Shreveport, Louisiana, who was a friend of his father's, who had led a successful bus boycott. Yes, this wasn't the first bus boycott. And he learns about, and the first thing the guy tells him is, you've got to organize transportation for everybody. They'll march for the first few days, and then you got to get everyone everywhere. And so Rufus Lewis is made transportation chair. He organizes a 350-car carpool that transported everyone to school, work, church, and everywhere else for 12 months. Now, among the people who were dispatch operators was Rosa Parks, who had gotten fired from her job and became a dispatch operator for the carpools. Inez Ricks and Georgia Gilmore were two women in town. They each created a club of women who cooked food and sold it on Sundays to pay for the gas and traffic tickets that the carpool drivers were constantly getting. And they competed vigorously to see who could raise the most money to support the movement. Meanwhile, Ella Baker took Rosa Parks on a tour of the North to raise money from NAACP donors. The Doers and Miles Horton hit up the Highlander network of donors to support the effort. And then Bayard Rustin came to town. Now, all the white conservatives down in Montgomery were saying this is all the work of outside agitators. Bayard Rustin was an outside agitator. He was an openly gay black man in 1955 who'd been an organizer in the Communist Party of America, who'd been a pacifist and conscientious objector of World War II, and was a disciple of Gandhi. And Bayard Rustin came to town, and he went to King's house, and the first thing he noticed is King had two armed men outside the house, and King was carrying a sidearm. King had applied to the governor of Alabama for a license, in fact, to carry his gun in his car. And Rustin started talking about using nonviolence as the method of the movement, and talked to him about getting rid of the guns. And the first thing Rustin suggested they do is the courts had indicted over 100 members of the Montgomery Improvement Association, and Rustin suggested they all put on their Sunday best and march together down to the jail and turn themselves in. It was the first true nonviolent civil disobedience of the movement. And Rustin, though, was an outside agitator, so he left town and went to Birmingham and lived at a hotel there and coached King over the next year from Birmingham on how to do that. But Rosa Parks had been a longtime activist and organizer. Her husband had been affiliated with the Communist Party. So they decided she also wasn't a sympathetic case. So another woman who'd refused to move to the back of the bus, Aurelia Boynton, was the case that Fred Gray argued first, and the NAACP took all the way to the Supreme Court, which then in December of 1955 ended the Montgomery bus boycott and ended bus segregation in Montgomery. So the question is, who was the leader of the Montgomery bus boycott? That's not the way I learned it growing up. I thought one person sat down, another stood up, he led everyone to march, and everything changed. But it was the leadership of the many. And when we look at social change, you can take almost any moment in history, and what you find is when you dig into it, you find it's lots of leaders. It's lots of people stepping up and courageously acting together. And if all those different leaders hadn't acted, and they weren't people who were assigned, they weren't people who were hired, they were people who stepped up in different ways, all kinds of people, and led. And if we want to create change in our communities today, the question is, what is our leadership strategy? How are we making it possible for lots of people to step up and get involved? The second part of the definition is about taking responsibility. And one of my mentors was a woman named Lisa Sullivan. And Lisa unfortunately died at the age of 40, but was a great organizer. She had created an organization called Listen, which was a network of grassroots activists around the country. She had run the Rockefeller Foundation's leadership program and headed the Black Student Leadership Network of the Children's Defense Fund. And Lisa mentored a lot of people. I know dozens of leaders I know who were mentored by her. And in fact, the president was one of her mentees and was someone who, the first person he ever heard say, "We're the ones we're waiting for," was Lisa Sullivan. And Lisa was one of those mentors who was tough as nails. And what she would say was she always pushed us and she said, a leader doesn't complain or blame. A leader talks about what they're going to do. She'd say, we are the ones we're waiting for. What are you going to do? Don't tell me why they're doing it wrong. Tell me how you're going to fix it. She said, you're either working the problem or you're working the solution. You can only work one side. You're either making one or the other bigger. And she'd always say, how are you making the solution bigger? The second thing she said, which I took truly to heart, was she said, your first job as a leader is to develop other leaders. It's not about you. Your job as a leader is to constantly figure out, how am I building and enabling others to lead? And she would say to me, and I became a Rockefeller Fellow when she was there, and she said, how are you taking this experience and giving it to others? She said, I didn't put you in here to develop you. I did it in here so that you could develop others. And that sense of responsibility we have as leaders to build others. And the third thing was that she said, how we lead is as important as what we're leading for. That the ends don't justify the means if we want to lead long term. That how we lead is truly important. I want to take a moment again, and I'd like you, again, to think about who in your life believed in you, opened a door for you, saw a skill or gift in you you didn't know you had. Who opened that door or created an opportunity for you in your life? And I'd like you to turn to the person next to you and share that story. And think about kind of someone who made that difference in your life. Let's come back together again, please. So again, could I get a couple volunteers to share your story with the group? It's a great way to honor someone you made a difference for you. Could I get a couple people to share your story real quick? Great, right here.
Yeah, my hands down was my mother, who believed in me and gave me an opportunity to be somebody different than what my environment could have made me. And she worked really, really hard, really, really hard to provide as many opportunities for me as possible. So this one's for my mama.
Great, thank you. Thanks. Do we have another person? Then I get to pick on Mara. The person I know in Arkansas.
So when I was in high school, I was in a percussion ensemble. We played steel drums and all sorts of percussion instruments, and I never thought I was very good. It was just something I did for fun. And we had this fantastic director who was directing our percussion ensemble. And my first day, he hands me the music to this really difficult piece. And I was like, there's no way I can play this. But he was like, I think you can do it. And so I worked really hard. I spent hours practicing. And in the end, I ended up playing it, and I played it really well. And he just kept giving me harder and harder pieces from there. But I don't think I ever would have been able to do that had he not given me that opportunity.
That's great. So I think as leaders, we have to think about what it felt like when folks have done that work for us, and we have to remember that it's our job to make others feel that same way. How are we paying that forward? The third part, excuse me, of the definitions about values, and I like to use the Army leadership manual to talk about this. I like the construct. It's called Be, Know, Do. And the basic idea is, first I have to understand, who am I as a leader? What's my mission? What's my group's mission? What are my values? How do I work with others? What are my strengths and weaknesses? I have to master that before I gain the knowledge and skills to achieve that mission. I would argue that most leadership programs on campuses and in communities focus on knowledge and skills, but very few focus on the be. Yet when you think about why leaders suck, it's usually the be. When you think about the worst supervisor you ever had, or the person on the committee or board you're on that drives you crazy, it's not often that they lack knowledge and skills. It's that they're a pain to work with. It's about values. When we think about the leaders in the public square that, create scandals or create problems, it's often about the be. It's often not that they don't have the knowledge and skills to do their job. It's about who they are. And yet, when we develop leaders, we don't often talk about the be. Yet, I would argue that's where the whole action is. At Public House, our leadership development program is almost exclusively focused on the be. Because we believe there's lots of places they can engage knowledge and skills, but if they can gain that foundation to build on, that's where great leadership comes from. And we talk about 5 values that we think are important for leaders today who want to make a difference in communities, and I'll walk through each. And the first is about recognizing and mobilizing assets. And Steve Ramos was a high school dropout who went back eventually to get what he called his good enough degree. And Steve was thinking of becoming a cop in the Washington Heights neighborhood in New York where he grew up when he decided to do the AmeriCorps program and serve at an agency called Fresh Youth Initiatives, where he was running an after-school program for teens in the neighborhood. And he found out one day that the church nearby that had had a food pantry for years was closing it down because they didn't have enough volunteers and donations. And Steve had an idea. What if the kids from the youth center took over the food pantry? And they did. Most of these kids were poor themselves. And in the first 2 years, they collected and distributed something like 60 tons of food. And what happened is more kids started joining his program. The kids were hanging out longer. They started doing better in school. And he was on to something. Steve went on to get his undergraduate and master's degrees, and today is the CEO of Fresh Youth Initiatives. And I was actually there with him on Monday doing the Martin Luther King Day of Service with his young people. And what Steve did, and what Steve believes in, is like the proverbial glass, and I'll use the water bottle. And the age-old question, is it half empty or half full? And Steve understands the correct answer. And the correct answer is yes. It is both half empty and half full. That every single one of us has gifts and talents that make us great family members, great friends, great workers, great leaders, but also all of us have emptiness. We all have mistakes we've made, regrets, conflicts, things we're not good at. None of us wants all of our ex-boyfriends or girlfriends or siblings interviewed for an investigative journalism piece. We all have it. Yet service is often about people who define themselves as full, going into communities that are defined as empty, to help people who've only been defined by their emptiness with the notion that their job is to fill them up. We think at best that's arrogant, and at worst it's oppressive. We think leaders have to have confidence in their fullness and humility about their own emptiness. And then where they're working in communities, their job is to find the fullness and to help people identify and give their gifts. And that when you do that, you change the power differential, and you also create opportunity for real transformative change. And that's what Steve did. These young people aren't being served by Fresh Youth Initiatives. They're serving the neighborhood. And many of them poor themselves, many of them struggling. But it's through their own service that they've built their confidence and their skills and their education. And so for us, we think it's about how do you do with communities, not do to communities. The second value is about diversity and inclusion. Monty Allen has a particular form of Tourette syndrome, where when he involuntarily blurts out, it's often vulgar, often very vulgar, and he can't control it. And as you can imagine, growing up with this was very hard. He got teased, he got bullied, he got thrown out of class in school, and he was told he would never be able to have a normal job with people. He was sent to shop in high school and told, that's your future. But his shop teacher recognized he was brilliant and said, you're going to go to college. And he worked with him to get into college. And he did, and he went to the University of Cincinnati. But it wasn't going well. He'd been kicked out of classes, he had had trouble. And so Monty one day decided he was going to drop out, and he was sitting on a bench crying when another professor came up to him and asked him what was wrong. He told her his story, and she went to her dean. And it was the dean of criminal justice there, and told him about Monty. And they met with Monty, and he said, Monty, you're going to graduate from college. You're coming into my school. And he met with the faculty, said to the faculty, you're not going to give him any academic breaks, but here's the deal with the guy. This is what's going to happen in your class if you have him. If you're uncomfortable with that, let me know, and I'll personally tutor him through the credits in an independent study. And he got through. And he graduated from college. And things started to look good, but then turned south again. Couldn't get a job. Ended up a night watchman. And then he decided to do Public Allies. And he got an organization called the Free Store Food Bank, which had been a placement for us for many years, another food pantry organization. They met him, and they were intrigued. And Bob Lippman, the supervisor, said, you know, we're going to have to change we're going to have to break almost every personnel policy to hire him. But they did. And they started him in the back until he got comfortable, and then started having him interact with clients. But he had to say to the people, my name's Monty Allen, and I've got this disease of Tourette's, and I may start swearing at you or saying vulgar things in the course of our time working together, and if that'll bother you, I won't be offended if you want to work with someone else. What do you think happened? Everyone wants to work with Monty. Why? Because people go there who are in challenging times in their lives. Why are they at a food pantry? And again, they're used to going to someone to serve them who has power, who they see as probably someone who's got it all together. And the first thing he tells them is he doesn't have it all together, that he's with them. So not only does that go well, but they realize in the course of his working there that because he had been on disability for years, he understood that system left and right. Today, he heads their disability rights advocacy program there and works with people to help them through the system and navigate the system. He's still working there 5 years later. And what Free Store Food Bank did was they demonstrated their true commitment to inclusion. And sometimes you got to break the rules. And to me, what the lesson is that sometimes when you break the rules, when you take those risks, when you bring in different kinds of people, you get gifts and skills you didn't know you had. By having someone who'd been through some of these systems, they got someone who knew how to navigate them in ways that their social workers didn't. And I think as leaders in today's society, diversity is not an ideal, it's not something you believe in, it's something you do. And I always say to organizations, there's a simple pass-fail test. Who do you bring around your tables? That demonstrates how committed you are. Are you asking yourself, do I have all the voices and perspectives from this community at my table I need? And then what am I doing to make sure and hold myself accountable to that? I think true inclusive leadership is about being accountable and holding yourself accountable for ensuring that the rooms you're in, the tables you put together, have diversity at them. The third value is collaboration. Kalila Slater Harrington worked at an organization in Cincinnati that's gotten a lot of attention called the Strive Network, which has built this model of collective impact. And at Strive, Kalila is working on building these networks of organizations who'd work together on common goals. And I was interviewing Kalila, and she said, Paul, it's never about getting organizations to collaborate. It's about getting people to trust each other. And she said those networks that spent the time building trust worked enormously better than those who sat down and tried to start doing work together. Collaboration is about trust. We do an activity at Public Allies where we divide allies into groups based on 4 leadership styles. Visionaries, who are people who are great at big ideas and see the forest, not the trees, and are really great at inspiring people. Analysts, who are people who are really focused on quality and doing things well and doing things right and seem to know how to get things done in detail. Nurturers, who are those folks who seem to be able to bring people together and mediate conflict and coach folks and are the people everyone goes to at Fridays. And mobilizers, who seem to be able to do the impossible and are able to get big things done fast and seem to be able to handle more and do more than everybody else. And we talk, and we have the allies go into the 4 areas where their leadership styles are, and then we talk about what that means. And when we think, however we bring, if we're inclusive, we bring different kinds of people together or different kinds of leadership styles together, we're going to have conflict. That is inevitable. If you are collaborating effectively, you're going to have conflict. The question is, have you spent enough time building trust where that conflict is constructive, or haven't you, in which that conflict's only destructive? When you use tools like leadership styles or other things, there are a variety of tools you can use to start having conversations about how people work together differently and see things differently and understand different people's perspectives. But when we do that and we understand motivations and we understand why people do the work and who they are and all that, then we can actually start to have conflict. Because it's in those differences that true innovation comes out. Sorry. The 4th is about continuous learning. About 9 years ago now, the Echoing Green Foundation in New York asked me to speak to all their fellows. They're an organization that funds social entrepreneurs to create new organizations. They asked me to give a speech on how we built Public Allies. And I started writing that and then realized it would be utterly useless to them. And so I created a presentation called The Worst Practices of Social Entrepreneurship. And I cataloged the 10 biggest mistakes Public Allies had made in our first 10 years. The 10 things I would have done differently. And the first slide was called Things I Suck At. And the reason was because I thought that the number one worst practice was thinking as the leader that I had to know how to do everything, that I had to be an expert in everything, that I had to control everything, and that my fear that people would find out I didn't know anything was the biggest problem. And if I'd just been confident with what I know and humble about what I didn't, I could have prevented a whole lot of problems. And so I had this list, but before I shared this worst practices publicly, I thought I should share it with our organization, with my staff. But I was kind of terrified that morning when I shared it with them to put this list of things I suck at in front of my employees. It included things like interpersonal conflict, personnel management, patience with process, administrative paperwork, being punctual, small talk, active listening, trusting my instincts, delegating responsibility, making unpopular decisions. I suck at a few things. And so I put this list in front of my employees, which is kind of terrifying. And then something happened. Everyone started nodding. And the reason is because the things you suck at aren't a secret. If you dominate every conversation, everyone talks about it. If you show up late and do everything last minute, everyone notices. The reason why we do this exercise at Public Allies called the gift seat, where our allies get a 360 review of how they're practicing their values by their fellow allies and supervisors, but they get the results while sitting in a circle with all the people who reviewed them, and the only thing they can do is ask clarifying questions. They're not allowed to respond. And everyone's terrified of it. And when I talked to the allies about it, you've done it. And I said, isn't what you're terrified of that you're going to realize you're not fooling anybody? The reason why we're terrified of feedback is because we think no one notices. We really do. We convince ourselves no one notices that I don't know what I'm doing. Everyone notices. And I think as a leader, when you can just own it, it makes it a lot easier. Because you create at least the possibility that people will talk about it with you, And if you don't own it, people will just talk about it without you. And we all do that. How many times do we leave me? I can't believe the way they were doing it. We do that. And why do we do it outside the room? Because we can't inside the room say, you know, you need to take it, dial it back a little bit. And if we could say that, we wouldn't talk about it outside the room. So as a leader, when we own it, we at least create the possibility that we can learn, that we can have authentic relationships, and that we can change, and that we can also call others on their stuff. The fifth value is integrity, and simply we define that in two ways. One is about how leaders stay true to themselves, to their be, that they're true to their values, their mission, and they always are clear about what that is and why they do the work, who they are, why they do what they do, and what they want to do, and they're always clear about that. And the second is about how we hold ourselves accountable, those we work with and those we serve, and especially those we serve. There's a lot of service that happens in our society that's defined by the servers as what the people in the community need or should get, that isn't what communities want. My partner did a service project for her company, and it was a day of caring, and they went out to this, they were weatherizing people's homes. And the home that she was at with these volunteers had run out of the right stuff, and they was like, oh, we'll just use duct tape to put the stuff on the windows. It looked awful. And she felt terrible about this. And she called the agency the next day and said, you know, I think we should fix it and do it right. And they said, well, we can't really get back to every home. So she decided to drive to this woman's house and redo it herself. And she talked to the woman. The woman said, my house is too hot. She didn't want her house weatherized. She said she was hoping they'd put bars on the windows. She's worried about security, not heat. But isn't that often how volunteerism works at its worst? We define what someone needs without asking them, and we deliver the wrong service because it's what we think they need instead of finding out what they really need. And so when we're doing service, we have to hold ourselves accountable to the people we serve. We have to really understand, are we really helping people move forward? There was a study 20 years ago that found in Chicago that took only one poor neighborhood to support 2 middle-class neighborhoods. It studied all the public and philanthropic money coming to 2 census tracts. And then it looked at all the people who were working to help people who were in poverty in those 2 areas. And they found $9,000 per capita was coming in to serve poor people. And they found, well, if a family of 4 had 36,000 people in 1993, they'd be middle class. And I think we always have to challenge ourselves who are working in this sector with, are we perpetuating a situation where we're helping build services on top of people, or are we really, truly holding ourselves accountable to creating change? And as leaders, we have to really be clear about, again, what is our be? Because I think if you are clear on that, it makes everything easier and better. I want to close, as Mara said, one of our founders was Michelle Obama, and Michelle was an incredibly brilliant woman to work with and learned a lot from her. And we all knew she was going to go great places, but we never knew she was going to be a fashion icon. When I worked with Michelle, it was all sweatshirts and sweat jackets and jeans. We have like all these photos where she's never in, we have like 2 photos of her in a dress, never in pantsuits, and always in jeans and sweatshirts. So I can honestly say I knew she would do something great, but I never knew she'd be a fashion icon. But Michelle gave a speech when she became First Lady about her time at Public Eyes that I like to close with, because I think it really sums up what I've talked about today. She said, we all have skills and talents that make us good friends, family members, workers, and leaders, and we also have needs and shortcomings that come along with those strengths. We can't do well serving communities if we believe that we, the givers, are the only ones that are half full and that everyone we're serving is half empty. That has been the theme of my work in community my entire life, that there are assets and gifts out there in communities, and that our job as good servants and good leaders is not only being humble, but it's having the ability to recognize those gifts in others and help them put those gifts into action. At Public Eyes, we endeavored to do this by bringing these young people together from diverse backgrounds. We worked with African Americans, Asian Americans, Latinos, Native Americans, white, gay, straight, you name it, college graduates, ex-felons. We brought them all together every week to work in a group, and truly that's where the magic happened. When you saw those kids from all those different backgrounds really tussling it out and trying to figure out their philosophies in the world in relationship to their beliefs and stereotypes. The law school graduates realized they had a lot to learn about how communities really work and how to engage people. There's nothing funnier than to watch a kid who believes they know it all actually come across some real tough problems that test every fiber of what they believe. And then you see that young person with a GED realize that they could go to college because they're working with kids who are just as smart or not as smart as them who are going. And they gain a sense of the possibilities that they have. They know that their ideas are just as good, sometimes even better. That's when those lights go off. That's what we think of when we think of being asset-based, that a kid from Harvard and a kid with a GED are both full of promise. Everyone learned to build authentic relationships with one another where they could recognize each other's strengths and provide honest feedback on their challenges. They gained a blend of confidence and humility that prepared them to be able to lead from the streets to the executive suites. You could take any one of these allies, you could plop them down anywhere in community, and they'd know how to build relationships. As she kind of closed with saying, it's been our experience that there's incredible leadership potential throughout our communities. And whatever we're trying to solve in our communities, we have to believe in our own ability to step up, but we have to create as much opportunity for other leaders to emerge. If the Montgomery bus boycott had been about one pastor and one woman, nothing would have happened. And likewise, throughout our history, it's been the leadership of the many. And so we have to believe in and support as many people to step up, take responsibility, and hopefully learn how to practice the values that will help everyone work together better, because it is working together that will solve problems. So I want to thank you all for coming here tonight. It's great to be down here in Little Rock. I had a wonderful day here, and I'm happy to take some questions, and then we'll be signing books before we close.
Yeah, let's thank Paul. All right, please raise your hand and we'll get the microphone to you if you have questions. Any questions? Michael.
Paul, it's good to see you again. Michael Brewery from the first class in Miami, the guy who convinced Mayor to be a public ally. I have two questions for you. First off, I wanted to know, what are you planning on doing after you finish leading public allies? And the second is, in general, as we've seen the decline in terms of jobs in the public sector, we see the rise in nonprofits. In every state, it's the fastest growing sector. What do you think the right balance is? Are we asking too much of nonprofits? Talk a little bit about the secret sauce and how you've seen public allies thrive. Thanks.
All right. So on the first thing, I announced 2 months ago that I'm stepping down from public allies this summer after 21 years. And it was a decision I made after a lot of reflection, but a decision that it's the only thing I've ever done, and I feel I've given everything I have to it. And I thought it was a good time in the organization's life cycle, as we're looking at our next path of growth, to have someone bring some new energies and ideas to the organization. And so for me, and we have our largest class of allies ever, opened 2 new cities this year, and so it felt like it was a good time. We've got some momentum. We're about to look at what's next, and I thought it'd be good to have some new energy and ideas to do that. I frankly felt like I'm kind of one of those leaders who's starting to get old and tired. I'm starting to say, no, we can't do that. We can't do that. And I thought it's time for some new energy. And for me, what I've decided is my decision was to leave being a CEO, not to leave the work. And I think there's your work and your job. And my work is about developing leaders and helping leaders work more inclusively, authentically, and collaboratively. And so my next work will be focused on developing leaders and helping leaders work collaboratively, inclusively, and authentically. And so I'm working on some different things, and it'll probably be a small mix of things that I'm going to work on that advance that work. But I think that's the work I'll always do. And Public Eyes was a phenomenal vehicle to do that work. And the next leader is going to have an awesome job. I'm really excited for that person. So in terms of the sector's growth, a lot of people don't realize that the nonprofit sector employs about 11% of the U.S. workforce right now, 14 million workers. It's the 3rd largest employment industry in the country. In my state of Wisconsin, there's 250,000 people working in the nonprofit sector. My guess in Arkansas, it's probably pretty large too. And so it is a fast-growing, huge part of our economy and our workforce. And the reality is that the sector is being asked to do more, but Traditionally, the story was we were asked to do more, and devolution meant government was giving money to the sector instead of doing things itself. Now they're not. Now they're saying, do more, but we're not going to put more money into the sector. And I think that's the danger that the sector is dealing with, is it's being asked to do more with less. And I think that we have to look at the sector. You know, the amazing thing to me is when a company might close and lose 100 workers, manna falls from heaven. We give them breaks, we do all this stuff. But a nonprofit service, we cut a service that's going to kill 100 jobs in a community, plus kill services to thousands of people, and we don't care about those 100 jobs. And I think we have to, I think the sector needs a more powerful, to be a more powerful force in our states, in our society, and needs to be better organized around its work. And I think that this new way of working has to really be built up, because I think the sector is filling in more of the gaps and needs to have the capacity necessary to do that. When I started 20 years ago, there were not many nonprofit programs at universities in the country. My university certainly didn't have anything like that. Now they're all over the place. And so there's definitely been a growth in the professionalization of the sector. There's been a growth in a lot of things related to the sector, but I think it has to go further. Yeah.
My name is Angela Bukenya. I'm a second-year student here at Cleveland School of Public Service. How do you deal with emotional burnout? Do you even ever get challenges like that, especially when you're working with teams that you need more patience, like the example you gave us?
Yeah, all the time. So I think that, I do think it's important that every leader has to figure out what they need to be able to maintain balance in their lives. And I think in our society right now, it's become unfashionable in ways for people to seek balance. That kind of working harder and longer and faster is kind of the drive. And I think we have to get back to some amount of balance, and I think leaders have to figure out what they need. They need to figure out when they're going to turn themselves off and turn their phones off. They need to figure out how to create space to read and reflect and think. And so I think we have to find ways to do all of that when we're leading. And I think, you know, as I said in my case, when you hit a point where you realize that, that you've kind of given what you have, you've got to be able to and willing to step back. And I think that's the other piece of it. So I think that, but at the same time, I think when we're in those situations that are tough, we have to try and, we have to find ways to keep our balance, and we have to try and persevere. Because I think when we walk away from those conflicts, when we walk away from those issues, then the work doesn't move forward. And it is often in struggle that we find the innovation, that we find the solution, that we find the new way of doing things. But we have to take care of ourselves in the midst of that.
Question back here.
First of all, I wanted to thank you for your speech this evening. I really enjoyed what you had to say.
Thanks.
My name is Carol Strong, and I'm a professor at an open enrollment university in Southeast Arkansas. And I have always believed that potential is everywhere. I was one of the first people to advocate that with my students, saying they could actually be something in the state, and I've watched some of them go on and do that. We are actually shifting to where we're trying to get a community engagement project happening within the college, and I'm actually asking for some advice. Because I'm on a committee now. I was instrumental in getting a committee together to try and get independent studies or a program that would teach our students that they are the change for the future, and trying to get them involved in the community. But my fellow committee members want the big picture. They want something big. They want a project that's going to get wonderful press, that's going to have great success, that's going to make everybody in the community say, UAM did this and everything is good. And I think it starts at the general education level. I teach my American National students that politics is more than just the president to the students. So how do you suggest that I actually convince my fellow committee members that you start small and move upwards? So.
Well, I mean, if you go back to basic community organizing, even to Saul Alinsky's work, the whole notion is you have to win. You have to win some early and smaller victories so that people hold on and stay with you to the big ones. And I think sometimes when we go after something so large, we can alienate people more than empower them. When I went to the university, I was a gardener, and someone told me that there was an office at the university I could go to and I could apply, and I applied in June to start in September. And so I'm a big fan. I mean, I'm a big believer. Now I couldn't get into that school. Now they don't have that anymore. But I'm a big believer in that. So I think it's great you're working with those young people, because there is a lot of talent that comes that way. And I think that I do think that it is a question of how do you create success, because people, when they feel like they've got a handle on it, that's when they can join you in dreaming big. It's hard to dream big when you haven't seen what you can accomplish together first. And so I do think I would go back to the basic community organizing literature, which really, Alinsky and others who really get it, that you got to have the small victories to keep people engaged for the big ones.
Any other questions? Yes, right here at the back. This will be our final question, but then we start.
Great.
So much. How do you get people around the table who aren't involved in civic life, who are marginalized, who maybe see it as too tedious, time-consuming?
Well, I think there's two things. One is, again, it starts with building a relationship, not getting someone to the table. And I think that often, you know, Harry Boyd from the University of Minnesota has done a lot of work on the difference between mobilizing and organizing. And I think too often we've gotten used to mobilizing people, which is really about getting people, we have an agenda and we're trying to get people to come and help us do our agenda. Organizing is about helping people find out other people's agenda and then helping them act on their agenda. And I think that, and it takes more time, it's more tedious, and requires relationships, but it's meeting people where they're at. And I think so often these days, so many efforts are asking people to meet us where we're at, rather than meeting people where they're at. So I think you have to kind of meet people where they're at. You got to find out what their interests and needs are, and you have to build a relationship first, and then bring them to the table. And I think when we just kind of try and get people to the table, it's hard. And people's lives are complicated and tough. You know, my kids go to a school that's over 80% free and reduced hot lunch. A lot of the parents have jobs that are far from the city center, and it's hard for them to get there for activities. If you're trying to do parent engagement, you can't do it the normal way, because you're not going to get people. And so you have to shift the model to think about how do we shift the services to people's lives. And I guess I'll just close with this comment, because I think it's something important in the sector. One of the things I struggle with in the sector so often, and we fragment services. We act like someone's education and economic and health problems are completely unrelated to each other. And we set up this convoluted system where people have to go different places to get different things. But their life is lived in an integrated way. And what we've done is we're asking people to organize their lives around the convenience of our schedules and services, rather than organizing our services around their lives. And I think as a sector, one of the things we have to get better at is figuring out how do we organize our sector to better meet people where they're at, to adjust to how they live. That our hours, our services, the ways we work, the way we look at their lives and deal with different issues are as integrated and the way that they live their lives. And I think too often services are organized around kind of what works best on paper rather than what works best for people's lives. And again, that gets into how we do with instead of to. Because you can only learn how it works if we build relationships with them first.
Let's thank Paul very
you.
much. And